Recruiting is not just about matching resumes to job descriptions. The best placements happen when a recruiter understands the story behind the person, the real needs of the company, and the environment where that candidate can thrive. Today, companies are under pressure to hire faster. Candidates expect more personalized communications, and recruiters are expected to source, screen, follow up, advise, and maintain trust, often with limited time. So today we are going to talk about recruiting beyond the resume, why culture fit still matters, what companies misunderstand about hiring, and how AI can support recruiters without replacing the human judgment that makes great placements possible. Welcome to another edition of the Smart Office Podcast. I am your host, Hippolyte Asa. I am an AI implementation engineer. I help small businesses use practical AI systems to improve operations, client experience, and growth. Today, I am excited to welcome Michael J. Rodenberg, founder and CEO of Parable Talent. Parable Talent is a purpose-driven recruiting firm that believes every career move tells a story. The firm helps companies and candidates write the next chapter of their success by connecting exceptional talent with organizations where their story, skills, and values can thrive. Michael, welcome to the Smart Office Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Hippolyte. It was great to connect with you again, and appreciate the quick intro.
Right. So I was interested in Parable Talent, mostly because your company does not position recruiting as just filling open seats like most do. The language around the firm is very human, story, values, fit, talks about clarity, integrity, and care. That matters because recruiting can easily become transactional for both clients and candidates, but your approach seems to really focus on the person behind the resume and the company behind the job description. So we're going to talk a lot, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. And absolutely, I think some of the things you mentioned are absolutely some of the vision I had before I started Parable Talent, which is where the name comes from as well, is, as Jesus spoke in parables and, really understanding what a parable is, it's someone's story, right?
Right.
And that's so true with whether it's a candidate side, they have so much to bring that they can't necessarily put all in a resume. Like every person carries a story and every story has purpose.
Right.
And then same thing from the client side. If they're the hiring manager, they're trying to grow their team or they're trying to, change their culture or, hire an impact player, they need to be able to really articulate what they need and what their story is or what that person can do to help get them to that next chapter.
Well, I'm glad to really have you here because we're going to talk a lot about that. I think we're going to have a good conversation that will be valuable for business owners, hiring managers, recruiters, and candidates who want to understand what really creates a successful hire. And for everyone listening to this conversation, we'll talk about a couple of things. We'll talk about hiring. Hiring often fails when companies focus only on resumes and technical skills. We've seen a lot of those happen. And then another thing is how recruiters can really identify strong long-term fit for understanding culture, values, motivation, and their story. I want to definitely talk about how technology is changing the recruiting and hiring or candidate sourcing phase, right? Communication is shaping up communication. So as you want to be called Roddy, I will call you Roddy today. So let's start by, first of all, before we get into recruitment and talent, can you share your story? Like what led you into recruiting and what eventually led you to create a Parable Talent?
Yeah, very in depth. So basically, I guess, was it right out of college, actually, I was placed by a recruiting firm and, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Of course, I was graduating at a, little challenging time, just post recession, 2011 timeframe. And I remember being placed by a recruiter. And at the time I was working on a contract role, but I was looking to buy a home, and I couldn't really qualify for a loan unless I had a permanent job. And so while I was working contract, I was kind of that person. I was bugging the person that placed me, saying, "Hey, find me a full-time job. I want something permanent so I can qualify for a home mortgage."
Right.
And so I had an opportunity to kind of shadow that person at the time, and that kind of got me in the door in staffing and recruiting, where I first started, which was actually at Robert Half. And so it kind of fell in my lap. And after I realized, even though I studied accounting and finance and sport management in college, where I went to High Point University and played as a Division I athlete, I didn't really see myself, sitting behind a desk doing accounting. And there's no
Right.
knock on that. It's a great occupation, definitely high in demand, but I just didn't see myself doing that long term. So definitely was glad to find a position that allowed me to meet with people, to get the chance to, make an impact on people's lives, because as they obviously find new positions or, promotions that are a better fit for them, is definitely very rewarding for that perspective. But also I was surprised at the time, being only like a 23, 24-year-old kid, realizing you can make a lot of money in recruiting.
Yeah. Right.
And and there's a lot of money to be had. So definitely was grateful for my experience, Robert Half, but then it led me to, at the time, called Agilon, which is now part of the LHH umbrella, where I was kind of recruited by them at a networking event to launch their supply chain and logistics division. So I had never talked to any of the recruiting firms that had a specialty specifically in supply chain logistics. So I thought that was a
Mhm.
pretty cool opportunity to kind of help launch that, as they were the kind of founding state. They had three offices in North Carolina that kind of piloted testing it out. Like, hey, let's do supply chain logistics and see if that's an area of demand. And then that grew nationally within Agilon and LHH. And I think they have like 50 plus offices doing supply chain now. So that kind of led me in that path. And then during that time, a little backstory. So I started with Agilon. They did some rebranding in 2022 to become LHH. But I started on temp side doing business development, and then moved into executive recruitment, which is what I do now, and which is, full-time permanent direct hire search. And definitely found my sweet spot there. I like that it was a blend of not only doing the sales side, but also doing the recruitment and fulfillment of those roles. But also, I love that every person you meet with, I like calling it a two-way conversation, right? If I'm talking to a, higher level, say, candidate like a CFO or controller,
Right.
they could be a candidate one day. I might have a role that could be fit for them. Or, of course, they could also be a hiring manager, a
Hiring
decision
manager.
maker at their current company, that I could also potentially partner with in the future. So once that kind of light bulb came to my head and I understood that aspect, that's when all of a sudden I was off to the races, right? My book of business definitely grew after I kind of understood that aspect of like, people are people. Right. It's
Right.
not just a candidate or not just a hiring manager. They could be
Yeah.
both at the same time. And having that human interaction piece. But fast forward, to COVID, I actually moved into more of a training and development role in 2021, and so I kind of walked away from my book of business I'd built, over the past 8+ years, and so that was, a challenging decision, to say the least, to like walk away from a book of business. I'm not commission driven anymore. It's purely more of a leadership and development role. So then once that decision later was kind of out of my hands in 2025, they decentralized training. My role was no longer there, right? And so I
Right.
had the opportunity to stay with them, but at that time I'd always, I can't say always, but for a long time had always had the vision of starting my own and what that would look like. And so I finally had the leap of faith last
Yeah.
June to finally
Oh,
say,
okay.
okay, I'm going to start Parable Talent. And I remember being at the beach actually with my wife when I made the decision, and I was actually on the way home. This is like one of the few times that she drove, so I could just focus on doing some research and getting my LC, getting all the registration in place, and obviously getting kind of the brand and all those kinds of things launched. But it's one of those things where any business owner knows it could be scary, but it's also
Right.
exciting at the same time.
Yeah,
So.
you're right. You're right. I mean, we've all been there. So let Parable Talent, when it uses the idea that every career, we're going to talk about Parable Talent, like what you do and which market you do operate in. But they use the idea that every career move tells a story. What does that mean in practical terms, recruiting terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously every candidate has a story, and that kind of
Right.
goes, we talk about beyond the resume, you've got a personality, you've got
Right.
other skill sets that may not be listed, on a piece of paper, right? And obviously you got morals and values that might fit in better with certain companies that also share those same morals and values too.
Mm.
And it's funny if you look at, reasons that people say no to candidates, the number one
Right.
reason I've found in my searches is usually either culture fit,
Right.
right, or personality fit. There's a personality
So
clash, right? And so ultimately, when it's like every career move is a story, you're able to
Mm,
kind of share a little more about maybe what you gained from the previous company, but also what you can bring to potentially take that current or new company to the next level, right? And how
right,
can you make an impact, or how can you make what like to call a ripple effect, right?
right.
Where it's like because of that hire, maybe they changed the environment, or they added new
Mm,
policies and procedures, or they created, new processes. And
right.
so there's always, a story from that perspective, but also how you impact the company. Right now, they may not have gotten to their goal, or been able to build their department the way that they wanted to if it wasn't for bringing on a top person or a top talent player.
So when a company or a candidate is an imparable talent, what do you want them to understand about your approach?
Yeah, I would say our approach is definitely we want to bring the human layer back in, right?
Right.
There's so many AI tools out there,
So
and trust me, no knock on them, they're great. But remember that they're tools, it's not the end
the
goal,
human,
right?
right?
And I think in recruiting especially where, if you think about your product and inventory, I hate to ever use that phrase, but you're helping place people. And it kind of goes back to my mention earlier is people are people, and you want to be able to truly take that human element back to understand what really makes somebody tick, right? What
Right.
really is going to be the right fit long term for somebody, not just because dollars and cents or job title match up,
Hmm.
but is it truly the environment that they're going to thrive in? Does it have some of the things that hopefully you've talked about in the interview of their wish list? And maybe they want growth and upward mobility. Well, does that company actually have that? Right?
Yeah.
And being able to really communicate transparently, that's a big one too. As so many recruiters out there, I hate to say, but just like no doctors created equal, same with recruiters. Not every recruiter is created
You're
equal as
right.
well. And a lot of that goes back down to relationship, and also are they going to focus on what's really the best fit for that candidate.
Let's talk about parable talent. I mean, you mentioned something about personality fit, culture fit, ill fit. Maybe a lot of people are listening and don't really understand how that fits, how they can consider that in their journey as candidates for certain
Yeah.
positions.
Right? Tell me about the culture in that company. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Right? People want to work for leaders that are forward thinking and not stuck in their ways, and not open to change. Also, from a flexibility or call work life balance perspective, they want to be treated like an adult. Hey, I'm gonna get my work done. Like I'm paid I'm not paid by the hour,
Yeah,
right? I don't have somebody that's micromanaging me and
yeah,
looking at my shoulder every day. But again, a lot of this plays into leadership itself,
right.
right? Good leaders are going to set expectations, on the front end, and the people, that are on their team should know it, and then they're going to be held accountable if they don't follow the expectations. And again, that can usually play a pretty big part on the culture, because there's probably a lot of leaders out there, and you can probably think of examples you've had yourself, where maybe they didn't keep people accountable, or they didn't set clear expectations. And those are two big things that usually play into the fact of what the culture is going to look like, at that company.
Yeah, people have to be accountable. More and more companies looks like they want people to be more accountable of their resources and the time. Maybe it's not worth it micromanaging. If you're micromanaging or hand holding, it means you're probably not the right candidate for that position. Is it simply just making a hire?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. It's kind of cutting in and out, but you said the sources for placement. I think one successful placement to me would be, is that person going to be with the company, for more than 6 months to a year, right? Because I,
Okay.
I would hate for a decision maker, to ever be in that position again in that short time frame of like, oh, well, now the position's vacant again. I've got to pay another fee to find another person, or I'm going to have to go through the pain again of not having somebody in the seat. Right. So that's one thing is like, hey, is this person going to be a long term fit, of course? But I think ultimately, when there's a there's a mutual feeling during the interview of excitement, right?
Right.
Like this person's excited about the role, the hiring manager's excited about, that candidate joining. That's usually the first sign right away, because I've talked to too many hiring managers where you could tell they're like weary. They have a little bit of they're on the fence kind of feeling, but then they're
Yeah.
kind of talked into it by a recruiter, like, oh no, you need to hire this person, right? Out of like a sense of fear that you can't find somebody better, right? Or a sense of like time, like urgency, like you need to hire. But I think a good recruiter is going to kind of take that and understand, okay, what are your genuine concerns? Okay, let's talk about that. Maybe you do some references to help clarify those concerns, and then get them to where they're a place where they're excited about the hire, right? But usually, if they're not excited, then it's not going to lead to a successful placement. But ultimately, I think a successful placement long term is this: someone that joins the company, of course, they're now an advocate, they're now an ally for you with that
Right.
company to help understand different growing pains they're going through or different changes that the company is going through, and they might need additional talent. But also when they're going to be promoted down the road, right? Because
Right.
no one wants to go into a role and that's just the last role they're in, unless it's like the CEO, right? Most time they want to go into a company and say, hey, how can I have some upper mobility? How can I,
Right.
continue to advance my skill set and advance kind of the base that I already brought to the company? But how can I, learn more and also hopefully develop others and potentially keep climbing up that ladder as well?
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen they've hiring managers sometimes they do have a hard time making that decision, and sometimes you don't know which one is going to fit in. If this is a long-term investment, if this is a short-term investment, they're kind of on the fence. And let's talk about what companies are struggling with the most in when it comes to hiring today. What is the status like? Is it finding qualified candidates? Is it um, uh, the slow hiring decisions? What is the pain point when it comes to hiring, both for candidates as well as the recruiters and the hiring managers? Where are the roadblocks and where is the challenge?
Yeah, I'd say two sides for sure, just like you mentioned, right? I
Um,
think on a candidate side, when there's a really long interview process, you're kind of get past the honeymoon phase. Like you
right.
lose your interest, because like if I did my first interview with you, say in January 1st, and I'm excited, I'm like, hey, let's move forward. And then it's like, okay, I didn't do the second round until the end of the month. Okay. I'm thinking like, why did it take so long for you to bring me back?
So
Right.
what would be a good time frame for you?
Well, I mean, I would say if you do the first interview, and yes, you might have other interviews you want to compare, of course,
Right.
right? I'd say it's got to be probably within the next, week to 2 weeks max of you at least having proper communication about, that next step,
Right.
right? And then, of course, layers on top of that, right? If you have a 3 to 5 round interview process, hey, is there a way to make that 2 to 3 rounds instead of 4 or 5? Right? Maybe you combine certain people or, kind of stack them a little bit better together versus having to bring back that candidate multiple times. And think about it, that's time they're missing from their current job if they're working, or they had to create an excuse as to why they had to leave or take certain video calls. So if you're able to kind of streamline that process, that always helps keep the candidate more engaged, but also helps from the client side to make sure they're not missing out on that talent because that candidate may have other competing offers coming as well, right? Or that candidate may have unknown circumstances come up later, kind of makes them not available or not interested in moving forward with that company. But also, I think you mentioned, from the client side, of course, I think some of the biggest challenges we talked about earlier is culture fit. Really find the culture fit. And that also comes down to supply and demand for certain skill sets. But a big one that I've come across recently, and this can be a definitely controversial topic, is the world of working hybrid or remote.
Right.
The companies that I've worked with that are struggling the most to find people are usually 100% on site and they have no flexibility.
Oh, they have no flexibility.
Right. So right
Yeah.
away, it's like, okay, even if your candidate pool is, say this circle, once you say 100% on site, okay, you're getting tighter now because
Tyler, yeah.
a lot of those candidates either are currently working in a hybrid schedule or they currently are remote. So now to go fully on site is a
And
challenge.
then
But
in your area where you're looking for people are looking for where they could either drive in and drive
yeah,
out or move in or public transport. So your sphere of research is critically much the circumference where you're going to look for candidates is very small right there.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you've talked to other recruiting firms when they talk about like, hey, if you're looking for someone that's, unemployed even, you're looking really thin too, just because of the market and demand, right? With the
Right.
unemployment rates. But also when you get specific with like, hey, they have to have this particular degree or this particular skill set, and hopefully they have our industry, our software experience. like your talent pool is shrinking and shrinking, the more requirements, of course, you're asking for. But of course, like I was saying, the whole remote, hybrid, and on site, I have found the best companies and the easiest companies I've found that I can fill roles for already offer some sort of hybrid structure. And so that's just a shout out to, I think, a lot of companies that might be on the fence of adding a hybrid structure or not because they think it's going to change their culture. I think you'll be surprised on how many more candidates you're going to attract just because you might offer those 1 or 2 days to work remotely as well.
Yeah. So, in terms, how about the recruiting firms? What are they struggling? How do they manage candidates, hiring managers? How is it dynamic there? Do they sometimes can be challenging, like managing the
Absolutely.
demands from
And
hiring managers and recruiters from candidates as well?
yeah, absolutely. I think for recruiting firms, one thing that we used to stress at LHH when I was there is it's non-negotiable. You have to get hiring manager access, right? Because if you think about it, if I'm working through like an HR or talent acquisition team and not near the actual hiring manager, they might be speaking two different languages when they come to how they define the scope of the job, right? And who's going to ultimately feel the pain? It's the hiring manager. They're the one that's going to have to train the person. They're the one that's probably doing the work if that role is vacant, right? And so you have to get the hiring manager access to really fully understand how to move the process along. And also, they're the ones that are going to, like I said, be feeling the pain of that vacancy.
Wow, that's very, very important right there. So I know there's some sort of pressure between sometimes a hiring manager really wants a candidate as soon as possible. And then sometimes they equally want making sure they have good candidates, quality candidates. So how do you balance speed and quality when a client really wants to feel like it's an urgent feel and they want something? How do you balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think transparency is key, right? Because sometimes, like, imagine this approach. If you were a hiring manager and I said, hey, here are two candidates I have for the job.
Yeah.
You interview one and it's say it's a no because they didn't have the culture fit. And then the other one you're like on the fence about. Okay. Then you might thinking, okay, he only sent me two candidates. But the transparency, I think, can help with the story and help really understand is like, hey, Mr. Client, I want to keep you updated. So I've spoken with these 25 candidates. I narrowed down to these top five that I felt, matched the skill set, matched the scope, of course, that you're looking for. They matched the compensation range, all those kinds of things. Then I narrowed it down to these top two that I felt were the best culture fit for you. Right.
So,
Much
yeah,
different delivery.
right.
Right. And again, a lot of that just comes down to transparency of it really knowing, okay, wow, he actually spoke with a lot more candidates to
Tell
finally get to those top two finalists that he presented to us, right, in that case. So I think that's just definitely one aspect. With the other thing too is when you look at it as a partnership, right? I think some hiring managers, they may have been either burned by recruiters in the past because they hired people that weren't a fit, and so being able to really partner and being transparent from their end too, like what's missing. And so we used to call this like standing meetings where I'd have like ideally like a check-in call every week to fully understand, hey, where are you at? Like, do you have internal candidates that you're now looking at? Or of the resumes and interviews you've conducted so far, do we have good feedback as to what you like or you don't like? Where's your interest so far? And then during those same meetings, I can also provide the hiring manager with updates from the candidate side. Like maybe they have other interviews in process, or maybe they have other offers on the table, or maybe they were just a little bit of a concern that we can kind of flesh out during that conversation so that it's not a concern if they want to move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you have to find a balance somewhere and how to, reach out. A lot of, in today's, we're going to talk about technology in a few minutes, but let's talk about Parable. So, Roddy, so as Parable Talent continues to grow, what business priority are you most focused on improving right now?
Yeah, just to understand the question, you said which
What
business?
what what business priority? What priority are you focused on right now as Parable Talent continues to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in an interesting position right now. I actually just started a kind of a fractional role. I'm supporting one specific client about 2 or 3 days a week. So my challenge right away is going to be the balancing of like, hey, my other clients that I'm working with and trying to expand from a firm or a contingency basis, I've got limited time, to work with those companies. So absolutely, I'm going to either need tools that can help me be more productive with less time,
Right.
right? Or I'm going to need, to hire somebody that can help me on like the sales development side, biz development, or on the fulfillment side of finding the top talent and, and the actual right fit for the active job openings that I have. And so
Right.
I think in any situation, there can never be enough outbound outreach,
Well,
right?
okay. Yeah.
Especially in recruiting, people will always say it's a numbers game,
It's a
right?
numbers
Like
game.
if
Yeah.
you, like most sales roles. So if you are able to somehow increase the amount of engagement you're getting with, candidates that, check the box based on title or location, or of course, industry experience, all those kinds of things, then it's going to naturally help you to filter to find out which candidate might be the best fit for this role from a fulfillment perspective. But also from the sales side, being able to stay in front of, decision makers, and ideally decision makers that either already use recruiting firms or that have upcoming or current needs. Those are kind of the two triggers in my mind. If I know a certain decision maker uses recruiting firms, that's somebody I want to stay in front of because they're more likely to use me. And then on the same side, if they have an upcoming or a current need, they're also more likely to use me even if they haven't used recruiters in the past.
Where
Mhm.
do you believe technology or AI can create the most practical value in this kind of a situation?
Yeah. I think if you can have some sort of automation for like some of the pre-screen interview process, that would definitely help. It's not going to replace the time that I actually meet with and understand the story of the candidate, take a deep dive in their resume,
Right.
but it may help me understand, okay, I'm not going to spend a full interview with this candidate, for example, if they're not in the salary range or they're not targeting that kind of position. So I think if there's some sort of way to automate that piece, what I call the pre-screen, almost like
Pre-screen,
a qualifying call, you
pre-qualification.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, with that candidate, that would definitely save some time. The other piece too is, as you know, it's the massive in-mails,
Yeah.
LinkedIn messages, email communication that you just naturally have to get to. So obviously, if there were some sort of, and I know there's tools out there, but there's some sort of way to automate some of those responses, especially on the candidate side, that would help one kind of keep your funnel clean, but two, kind of continue to build your pipeline because they may not be someone you want to interview today based on your
Yeah.
active desk or
Right.
what's open, but they might be a candidate you need to stay in touch with, right, for the future. So
Yeah.
if there's strategic ways to do more or less like a drip campaign,
Right.
right? Like, hey, they may not have an active need today, but I know they use recruiters. I know that they have a team, say, of like 5 or more people in the area I focus on. So for me, that's accounting and finance, HR, and supply chain. If I know that they're a hiring manager in one of those areas, that's something I want to stay in front of, right? So I might need to send them either, value add articles or white papers or just industry trends and news, jobs reports. And every now and then just maybe let them know about a candidate, of course, that's hot in the market, or let them know about a job that's hot in the
Right.
market that might be of interest to them or somebody they know, but different ways to add value every time that I reach out.
Yeah. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about candidates here. Candidates, just to follow up or piggyback on that concern about maybe certain things. A lot of candidates probably complain of being ghosted. It's in recruiting world, it's something normal where a, a recruiter is working on high profile and there's so many candidates and they really try to focus on the winning candidate, even though some candidates have been moved from one stage to the next and they keep filtering. But then the candidates never hear back from the recruiter or the hiring manager. How can the recruiter solve that problem? Because you want to be focused on the winning candidate. But now you feel obliged, and if you have 40 candidates, how do you manage that? Is that
Yeah,
what?
absolutely. Yeah.
Because to
And I
keep that
think
human
part
aspect, because one of the things like behind talent, parable talent is that human aspect. Because some people feel left out, or they feel ghosted, they feel like it's right when you're in job search for quite a while, and then you feel like you no longer exist. Apply, and then they reply they're interested and they never hear back, or they move to one stage, first interview, and then nobody never hears back. So it can be frustrating. So how would talent, parable talent manage such a situation? Or Can technology really help in that area?
Technology can absolutely help. And, I think if there's tools out there to identify, okay, if this candidate has been rejected, it might be as simple as adding a task to call that
Right.
candidate, or maybe an automated email that goes out to that candidate that says, at least here's an update. It may not give them the reason if it's more of a template email or a reused email, but at least gives them the update that they're no longer in consideration for that client. In most cases, that's much better, right? To have the
Yeah. Yeah.
rejection than just being left in the dark, right?
Of course.
The other piece too that I try to do is I've got a list of all the candidates that I'm submitting, and I do try to get back to them within a hopefully 40-hour window just to give them some sort of updates, right? And here's the bottleneck though. The bottleneck is sometimes I may not know the feedback from the client, right?
Exactly.
And there's again a couple things you can diagnose there. One, it might be client control, like I need to get better client access to know their feedback. Or sometimes it's just clear expectations. Like if the client says, hey, I'm going to be traveling. We've got other candidates we're interviewing. I'm not going to get back to you for a few weeks. At least I can explain that to the candidate to help, shape their expectations.
Right.
Right. But also, one challenging aspect of this same thing is I'm going through this right now. I've got a couple candidates I've interviewed with a client. The client's on the fence, right? They want to interview more candidates, but they want me to keep those candidates warm
Well,
because they don't want to let them go yet, right?
yeah, because it's
But
trying. Yeah.
that's a challenge. And so a lot of times I just have to be transparent with them and just say, listen, this is where they're at. The client still is interviewing other candidates, but they still have you as someone that they potentially want to revisit. And again, that's better than just hearing nothing,
Yeah.
right?
Makes sense.
But once that client does make a decision or does fill that position or decides not to move forward, then ideally that's where a good task management, and I use just simple reminders through my calendar to say, hey, follow back up with that candidate.
Yeah, I really think technology can really help, or AI can help in that area, because the work of some of the recruiters is really overwhelming. Like you're managing, you have three groups of people, two groups of people you're trying to manage: the hiring manager and the client. And the client pool
Hmm.
can really be large in such a way that you have to keep them warm, and then the hiring manager have to keep them at arm's length to make sure the business. I mean, they're still on the page that the position is still open, and yeah, it can be frustrating. And most often, thanks to podcasts like these, candidates are understanding the process. And it has led to a point where some of them just ignore, they're just giving up on applying or certain things. They're just like, okay, this is probably not going to work. And then meanwhile, recruiters are trying to fill positions. Probably say, I'm just one among 1,000. It's just going to be a waste of time. How would you encourage or advise candidates not to feel that way?
Yeah. They've probably been stuck in the black hole feeling before,
Right?
right? So they get a
Yeah.
little discouraged, absolutely. And I'd say the best case, of course, is working with a recruiter, I'd say like myself, where we can
Right.
talk not only about like jobs we have available that could potentially be a fit, but I think
Mm,
asking questions like, hey, what kind of companies could you see as potential fit for my background? Right? Because
right.
then even if the recruiter doesn't go to bat for you, you could start to think, okay, that's a way that I should think. I should start matching companies with my industry. Like
Right.
who are the same industry companies in my market? Or I could still, have a little bit more targeted research of not just job title, but also these are potential decision makers or potential, vacancies that I could be going after that are similar titles as well. And then the other piece too is as you're doing the job search, right? There's one aspect of just like you're relying on an ATS system, an applicant tracking system to
Right.
say, yes, this candidate is a, 85% match, whatever it is. Right. But there's also triggers that might help you get past that front gate a
Right.
little
Mm,
better by like, a more tailored resume, or of course a handoff, like using a recruiter that's actually going to go to bat for you and talk more about you as a person versus you as a resume. Right. And then so those kind of relationships will definitely help. But the other thing too is it's the follow up,
right.
right?
Follow up aspect.
Like if the candidate applies and then doesn't hear anything back, most candidates kind of just leave it like, okay, that's happened before. I'm not going to follow up.
So, yeah.
Right. But sometimes just that quick follow up will get you back on that recruiter's resume or recruiter's
Right.
radar, I mean, or on the hiring manager's radar again and say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I forgot to get back to that person. I should reach back out. And so I would say, just like any good salesperson does multiple touches to try to get a meeting, with a potential client or hiring manager, I think good candidates need to do the same thing. If they're active on the market, they need to reach out more than one time and almost have some sort of consistent follow up, to try to get back in front of that person.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, Roddy, let's talk about your best clientele, since the way you've analyzed it and the way you've shared it, looks like a lot of people out there are looking for recruiters like you, either hiring managers or candidates. So how can they get in touch with you? If and which area do you operate out of? Where? Because people may listen to this podcast all over the world, but where, if they get in contact with you, how can they help, and which area do you serve?
Yeah. So my ideal target market is North Carolina because that's where I'm based.
Okay.
But I have done searches nationwide in the US several times. And so ideally, North Carolina, I live in Greensboro, North Carolina. So I like to visit all my clients as much as I can, on site, understand the culture even more when you're actually there, getting a tour of the facility, those kinds of things, seeing how they interact. That's ideal for me. So I do like an hour radius of Greensboro is kind of my target market. And then the verticals I support, I've gone outside of these three, but the primary three are accounting and finance, human resources, and then supply chain logistics. And so usually if you're a hiring manager in those three verticals, would love to connect with you. Or if you're a candidate in those three verticals, that's definitely an area that I feel like I would offer the most value to as well.
Yeah. Can you share your website on how people can contact you? Is it on
Yeah,
LinkedIn
absolutely. So
or?
my website is www.parable-talent.com. And then, of course, my email address is just first dot last name. So that's Mikel.RODENBERG at parable.
And certainly they can equally probably reach out to you on LinkedIn as well, right?
Of course. Yep.
Yeah,
And
you can
so, yeah,
reach
you
them on
can find
LinkedIn.
me
So
on LinkedIn.
anybody accounting, you hear the fields who want to get in touch or explore how the candidate pool is. There are many people, even international people, trying to understand the job market in those fields. They probably reach out, and you'd be a very good resource to really help them out in terms of
Absolutely.
training or the job market, where the trends are. Wow. So, Roddy, thank you very much. It's really been an exciting conversation for joining me on the Smart Office podcast. I really appreciate the insight on recruiting beyond the resume. That's how I see it. And then candidate story, culture fit, trust, and how technology or AI can really support recruiters without placing the human side of hiring. It's really been an exciting conversation.
Yes. Thank you, Hippolyte, for the time. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you.